Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Tran, Head of Marketing and Business Development here at Gimmal. I am so excited to host today's live webinar along with my colleagues and our esteemed partner, Colligo. If you are joining for the first time, please introduce yourselves in the chat, where you're dialing in from. We're grateful that you're joining us live. We all have busy days, and please use this time to ask questions. Q&A will be available at the end of today's webinar. However, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen so that we can capture your questions. And if we don't have time to answer them live today, we will be sure to get your contact information and follow up after today's webinar. So for those who are joining today for the second series, we will also recap a couple of slides from the first part of our webinar series today, end-to-end email records management with Gimmal and Colligo. So the first part, we focused on automating your records, and today we will talk through smart, proactive strategies based on your retention and disposition policies. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel of speakers today. Before we start, just a quick housekeeping items. I mentioned it already. Please try to use the Q&A function rather than the chat so that we have a record of who and what questions you'll be asking us and follow up after the webinar if we don't have time today. So Tim Brady is the CEO of Colligo. He will be walking through the email management portion of today's webinar. And my colleagues, Ed Kaiser and Tim Butler, who is the Senior Account Executive and the Solution Architect here at Gimmal, they will walk through the discovery phase of our webinar, and you will also get a cool, nifty little demo of how all of that works. And take it away, Tim.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim. And just a quick background on Colligo and who we are. So we're a North American-based company. We've been around for 25 years and always building solutions for the Microsoft ecosystem and organizations running Microsoft. And really the solutions have always been focused and predicated on saving time and increasing productivity, but bringing better information governance and compliance to organizations and getting the most out of their existing Microsoft 365 investment. We work with 5,000 organizations around the world over that period, since 2000. And we're part of the Microsoft Preferred Content AI Group and the AIM Leadership Council, and work with ARMA and other associations as well. And always focused on the email management and making sure that your email is compliant. With that, I will pass it to Ed.
Thanks, Tim. And again, just a little bit of background on Gimmal. We've been around since 2002, so a couple of years younger than our partners at Colligo. We are an information governance and records management company. And really our goal is to help you simplify your governance processes, whether that's identifying and classifying your content, locating it, managing it, governing it, and hopefully eventually making some decisions as to whether you retain or dispose your content. We too are Microsoft Content AI partners. We're active in AIM, ARMA, etc. Our customers are pretty much an even split between public sector and private sector, and spread broadly across North America and the world. You can move on here.
Excellent. Yeah, so one of the key principles, and for some who attended the first webinar in the series, this will be a bit of a summary or recap. And for those who didn't, this will hopefully be new information. But just to recap a couple of the key principles here, the email, it's a key part of your records management program. Something like 5 to 10% of all emails are official records, and those need to be properly retained, stored, kept for the right amount of time. It's often said that 5 of every 6 records in the organization come in via email. It's the primary channel for records to come into the organization. And so with that, it's a part that shouldn't be overlooked. It should be focused on, and a lot of time and thoughtful, careful consideration should go into how to manage your emails as an organization. And one of the key things that we hang our hats on is Outlook should not be a repository. It's meant to be a communication mechanism or a communication channel. but it should definitely not be a repository. And you shouldn't, as such, you shouldn't manage huge volumes of emails and content in your Outlook inboxes. The number of organizations we speak to that are still doing this in this day and age is astonishing, and it's really not compliant at the end of the day. Users can delete content. It's isolated, not collaborative. There's huge volumes of documents living there. And so we really believe in the fact that Outlook inboxes and mailboxes should not be used as that system of record or as that repository. That should be SharePoint. SharePoint, and as part of the Microsoft 365 suite, it's formerly known as SharePoint Online, has the capabilities to store, manage, and retrieve all of these records. It obviously needs to be set up and have a solution on top of it to manage the information better, but it certainly serves as a good storage location for those records and as that system of record. And you should ensure it's not just the emails, right? It's often the attachments that have just as much value, whether that's a contract, an NDA, a purchase agreement. The attachment often serves as quite an important part, and it's important to make sure those are captured as well. And then there's just benefits from the collaboration standpoint. What good is saving this record and this information if we can't go and find it later, right? And so the metadata is just a critical aspect of that, and being able to go and find it later. Just an anecdotal story. I mean, we speak to some organizations before they're working with us that we go in and they say, oh yeah, and so-and-so works over the Christmas break to catch up on all the filing from the calendar Q4 period, and spends the entire 2 weeks filing emails and going in, uploading and attaching metadata to it. Well, that should be much easier, right? And so it's a critical part. The metadata piece cannot be overlooked, and it shouldn't be as laborious of a process as it is to upload emails to your system of record. The problem is people just don't do it, right? And so our solution as partners here together is to make this easier and more automated and more automatic, and make it so people actually do it and follow the policy that they're supposed to be following. And so why should we do this, right? Why is this so important? A few reasons just spelled out on the last slide, but just to reiterate, I mean, compliance, the laws, the regulations are critical to be followed, and often this, in an ever-changing and fast-moving regulatory environment, this is a huge aspect today. Not centralized equals not compliant in our view, right? If it's not accessible to others and those who need to see it, if management can't find the purchase orders to prove when something was purchased and when that was issued, I mean, then they're just not following the rules of the organization and best practices. It's just simply not compliant. And then to avoid risks and penalties with litigation, as an example. But there's, every couple of weeks, there's a big news story on another organization that is facing a penalty, whether it's an SEC penalty or otherwise, right, about not being able to find certain information. Often it comes down to emails and email records and things being disposed of when they weren't supposed to be, and vice versa, kept too long, right? And so just you want to avoid those. There's obviously the costs of the fine, but there's a ton of reputational damage associated with that as well. And so the cost of non-compliance can just be very, very significant and hinder a business. And so these are some of the key reasons why you'd move records to a system of record. And so just to bring it all together for those who are on the last webinar, part one, you'll recognize the slide, but key aspect here is discovering the emails that you want to classify and move to your system of record to SharePoint. So being able to find those, and then how do you move them? How do you make it easy to bridge them from Outlook to SharePoint? And that's where Colligo can help. And then where we'll focus a lot of time today is that Colligo exchange and putting them in SharePoint, where they can then be managed by Gimmal records. And so it's really just an end-to-end, find what you're looking for, move it, and manage it better. And with that, I will pass it over to Ed.
So we're going to walk through the journey here of a typical email as it goes through this process of arriving in your inbox, how you can use Gimmal Discover to find it, and perhaps find emails that might be records, move them into folders, how Colligo can move them from there into SharePoint, into your system of record. And then ultimately today, we're going to talk about how Gimmal Records can automatically classify that content based on your records retention schedule, go through the full lifecycle management process, and then ultimately either keep or dispose that content. So as Tim mentioned, let's get on the road here. There are emails coming in probably to your organization, thousands or tens of thousands today, arriving in email inboxes across your organization. And as we talked about in the in our initial or our first webinar, excuse me, you can use Gimmal Discover to regularly look at those inboxes and search for phrases, keywords, etc., things that might identify those emails as potential records and move them into a folder in Outlook that can later be moved into SharePoint. This is something that we see our clients, you'd set it up and say, I'm looking for invoices. That's sort of the first part of the automation process, to find emails that could potentially be records and start moving them into the process to get them into SharePoint Online. And then, as we discussed last time, this is where Colligo Email Manager comes in. The ability to move that content, whether it's in a folder that was set up that Gimmal Discover put content in, automatically move that content along with all of its metadata. And that is, as Tim mentioned, a really critical factor. We can move that as part of the process automatically from the folder that Discover put the content in, the emails in, and move it into SharePoint Online. Similarly, we know that other emails will also arrive in your organization. Users can do this one by one. They can drag and drop from their Outlook inboxes into SharePoint, or do it in a bulk fashion. We covered a lot of that in the last session. Now, once the content Tim will show you this a bit more detail in the demo. Once we get that content in SharePoint Online, now it's in your repository. We can put records policy on it, but it also can be leveraged across your organization. The key part here is the email can be put into SharePoint, the attachments, and either together or separately, along with all of that metadata. And it's that metadata that we will start to use to classify that information and put retention policy on the content. And then finally, and we're going to dive into this here in a bit more detail, what Gimmal Records will do is we're going to leverage your records retention schedule, create a file plan, and allow you to do automated classification on those emails. The system will crawl your content in SharePoint Online, assign it to a record series within your records retention schedule, and then run it through its life cycle through to disposition. Well, you can make these decisions as to whether you keep it or ultimately run it through a disposition process. And then at the end of the line, of course, a little cheeky here, but you're going to have a lot of content that you might want to delete. We suggest you do for a variety of reasons, but to follow on down the road, once you do find content that is available for disposition, that we do definitely suggest you dispose of it. And so it's a little warning. Yeah, if it can be deleted, don't forget to get rid of it. And with that, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you here if you can dive into a fair bit more detail on how this whole process works.
All right, glad to do so. And yeah, hello, everybody. Thank you again for spending a few minutes out of your day with us. I'm going to do my best here to pivot away from the slideware. We're going to take a pretty quick drive-through or demo through the software, try to connect all the dots for you guys to show you what we think is a really slick solution that, based upon the poll results I saw, I think a lot of you will be pretty excited about what you see here. At least I think so. Want to give a good quick shout out to Dennis. Dennis, thank you. Gold star for you. There's the poll question results. Dennis is participating in the Q&A, so thank you, Dennis. Keep doing it. Everybody else, join in. Please enter your questions into that Q&A. All right, so with the poll question, guys, as a kind of a quick recap, what I want to do here for you is start off where we kind of left things off last time. And really, guys, kind of goal number one from our webinar was to really espouse, if you will, getting email into a system of record. And apologies, this will be duplicate information for some of you, but for those of you that missed the first webinar, you have multiple options within your Outlook inbox via Colligo Email Manager. Option one, as some of you saw last time, you can select emails kind of onesie, twosie fashion, if you will. Use on the right-hand panel, use the Colligo Email Manager window to add metadata, and then to eventually click the little cloud button and load it up into SharePoint. That's kind of option one, right? So Worst case scenario, right, guys, again, based upon the poll results I saw, is you just don't manage email at all. And then there they are once again, right? 12% of you like, you know what, we're not really storing them. And some of the other responses that are there. Kind of a little bit better, but still a pretty rough scenario, right? Some of you, and our heart goes out to you guys that have to do this. You'll take your emails, you'll save them locally, and then you'll kind of manually upload them into SharePoint along, hopefully with some metadata. Better than the worst case, but still a pretty tough hill to climb there. So along comes Colligo, right? And they say, hey, look, we have a much better way to do this. Option one with Colligo is to use this right-hand panel and kind of one at a time or onesie-twosie at a time, load the emails up into SharePoint. And we covered some of this briefly in our slides. Well, Colligo continues to develop software, and they said, you know what? We've got an even better way to do this. Rather than just using this, which is a good solution, we've now got a better solution, and that involves the creation, configuration of some folders. And the idea here, and we did briefly cover this last time as well, rather than end users working with this right-hand panel, what they can do instead is simply drag and drop from their inbox into one or more specially configured folders. Now, what's the benefit of that? Well, number one, it's easier on the end users just to drag and drop. And then number two, as you would have seen last time, and you can review the webinar if you want to get those additional details, each of these folders can be tied to an automated schedule to bulk load your emails into SharePoint. By the way, in case this question is in the back of some of your minds, when you do the upload, it can be a move or it could also be a copy. Now, for kind of demo purposes, let me just click on one of these folders here. This folder I've created ahead of time called Standard Correspondence. This particular example, this was in my inbox. I dragged and dropped it into Standard Correspondence, and I used the copy functionality. So you can see, once upon a time, it lived here within the inbox, but has now been uploaded into SharePoint. Nice little badge functionality you get here for email that has been uploaded into SharePoint. You're going to see that nice little Colligo badge. And Ed made this point, but let me emphasize it again. Guys, it's not just the email itself, but it's all of the metadata along with the email. All of that kind of in tab number one here in the browser, just as a review. Option three, real quickly here, guys, and this was mentioned in the slideshow as well. So you can go with the email, Colligo Email Manager right-hand panel. You can use the drag and drop for one of the folders. Or if you really want to put the process on steroids, guys, you can make use of the Gimmal Discover tool. What Gimmal Discover does in the end is the same thing as what the end user is doing, but it does it in automated fashion via a set of configuration rules, and really the sky is the limit in terms of the options. You can essentially remove the end user from the equation. Discover can automatically move these emails into these folders so that they will be bulk uploaded. In the end, goal number one is get your emails that are records up into the system of record. In our case, we're talking about SharePoint Online. All right. So let's move it over now to SharePoint. Won't spend a lot of time here. Most of you are familiar with SharePoint, but just to illustrate for you, right, that email that you just saw a moment ago here, right here in the standard correspondence, this email in this folder here has now been uploaded to SharePoint, and there it is, along with all of its metadata. So it's now in the system of record, and that is our nice little segue, guys, into part two, really, of the webinar here, what Gimmal Records can do for you. Now, I want to draw your attention here right away under this recent records section. There's a lot more to Gimmal Records than we'll have time to show today, guys, but we'll cover the high points, especially relevant to the management of email. I want to focus your attention, as I began to say here, on this recent record that Gimmal Records was made aware of. Here it is right here. Let's just give it in a little more detail. I'll click that little ellipsis and just highlight a couple little details about what you're seeing here. Here is that email. If you really take the time to read through that URI, it is that email message which has been loaded up into SharePoint. Gimmal Records became aware of that email in SharePoint, and this is a big and, it classified it into CORO2-1. Now, the obvious question, at least I think, is, okay, that's cool, Tim, but how did it do it? What is the magic, so to speak, that allows Gimmal Records in automated fashion to load, to take those emails, those records within SharePoint and apply retention policy to them? Well, here's really the magic, guys. Let's jump over to the Plan tab. Gimmal Records will house your corporate retention schedule. I've actually got multiple loaded here depending upon who my audience is, but for our purposes here today, within this big bucket record schedule, I've got a series of record classes and some down here under CORO2. And the example we're looking at today is CORO2-1, General Correspondence. I'm going to start by looking at, for that particular record class or that series, what are known as classification rules. So guys, here's the idea. Via the use of a set of commercial connectors that Gimmal provides and what those connectors do, and there's different connectors for different repositories, whether it's your file shares or a Box repository or SharePoint on-prem, SharePoint online, or other repositories, specific connectors for each of them. In the end, the connector's job is to constantly crawl that repository and look for content, new content, or modifications to content. And as it's crawling, guys, it has access to all these classification rules. There's going to be rules for every record series or class. I want to walk you through quickly here just one example. So for my class of CORO2-1, the record we have in question, what is the logic that's being applied? By the way, guys, one specific example, the sky is the limit here, unlimited set of classification rule combinations you can create. But to give you one example, what the rules here say, okay, if the repository is SharePoint Online, check. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. If the SharePoint, that's what our @SP abbreviation means, if the SharePoint library is administration, check. If the content type, standard SharePoint architecture here, is email, content type email, check. Coming back into Gimmal Records one more time, content type is email. And finally, if the folder URL is administration, correspondence, indeed another check within SharePoint, then here's where the connector says, look, I've been crawling SharePoint. I've been looking for you, record, in this case, an email. You meet all the criteria so that I will now automatically classify you into CORO2-1. All right, so all well and good. Gimmal Records is now aware of that record. It has steered it into the appropriate record class. One more big puzzle piece to walk you through here in terms of the classification side of things. All right, so great. Once it's in CORO2-1, what do we do with that record? That, guys, is defined within the life cycle. So for this particular record class ahead of time, of course, I've assigned a life cycle known as correspondence, and a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, highly condensed time frame just for the purposes of our demos, but it's called correspondence plus 2 days. Let me give you a brief look at that particular life cycle. Let's jump over here to correspondence plus 2 days. These also, of course, were configured ahead of time. And here's really what's going on, guys. For this particular life cycle, which is associated to class CORO2-1, what is going to happen to the records when they're in that class? Well, again, not enough time to give you all the detail, but this retention column is really a combination of two components. Don't have time to show you now. It's a combination of triggers and retentions. But in plain English, what is this really saying? It's saying, hey, after the email or the record has been received, after just 1 day, declare the record. Now, what does declare mean? That means lock that record in place. It's really now a record, right? In SharePoint, we don't want people modifying it. We don't want people deleting it. It is now an official record. And then after it's been declared, phase 2, simply 1 day later, actually dispose and delete. I will take just a moment here to drop this action list box down, guys, so you can see the various actions that are available as part of your configuration. Generally speaking, the top two are the two that are most used most often. We've kept it a little bit simple for the purposes of the demo and really shortened the time frame and really condensed it, right? So that within 2 days, these emails that were automatically loaded to SharePoint are now automatically managed by Gimmal records. We've applied their life cycle. We've pushed the record through, drawing your attention now, guys, to phase 2, require approval. So let's get out of here. Let's bring you a little bit full circle. Let's come back to where we started this portion of the demo here, show you this page one more time. Here's what you saw previously, but this time I want to draw your attention down to a review of the life cycle. So you can see phase 1, it got completed. We identified it, we classified it, we locked it. And now here we're saying, look, this email record is ready for disposition. Finally, guys, within the software, what does that lead us to? That leads us to, within Gimmal records, what's known as the disposition inbox. Here's my kind of universal inbox. To make things a little easier on everyone, I've given you a filtered view here of just that particular class. Here's all of my records from that class, all emails. And drawing your attention down here to the very bottom, guys, here is that email, that roadmap that Ed showed you, right? It is now getting towards the end of that track. It's sitting in the disposition inbox, ready for approval. I will briefly mention here, guys, historically, when it came to destroying records, email or otherwise, virtually everyone required a last-minute approval. However, we are seeing a trend in the industry where more and more organizations are saying, you know what? Just by virtue of having been ingested into the system of record, you could actually automate this last step as well. Don't even need approval, or in other words, it was approved by virtue of having been ingested into the system of record. But still, this is the majority opinion. You've got opportunity here. We didn't have time, guys, to show you legal holds capability, multiple step approval workflows. But for now, just know end users can log in, they select one or more records, they can approve and then submit that approval to disposition, or in this case, destroy that record. Finally, guys, here within the Gimmal records tool, once records have been destroyed, typically they are captured into destruction certificates. Going to give you one quick look. Let's just do it this way a little bit quicker. Show you the destruction certificate details here. This particular certificate, you'll note, has 5 records that were a part of it. You want to get a little more detail, use this drop down. You can see all 5 records. And guys, all 5 of these records, right, in the end, just to emphasize the point, Gimmal records is using metadata. In our demo today, our webinar today, it's based specifically upon email metadata. We maintain all of that within the system. Here's just one other look at the same thing we've been telling you. All of this metadata, all the way down, is available to Gimmal records. And down here towards the bottom is all the stuff that was either in is in SharePoint, a lot of it loaded automatically by Colligo. So guys, just in closing here, right, just to bring it kind of full circle, point number 1 we really want to emphasize is get your email into a system of record. And then point number 2, once it's in the system of record via any of the options available to you, via the Colligo email manager, put in place the Gimmal records tool to apply the disposition or the retention policy, parts 1, part 2, to effectively manage your email. And with that, guys, I'm going to kick it back over to Tim to walk us through a customer success story.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. Awesome. So yeah, so great customer success story here. Love to share municipal government client of ours that working with Gimmal and Colligo for a number of years here. Good, large municipality. From our perspective, the biggest challenge they faced when they came to us is they had tons of employees with emails, but they needed to put these into a system of record and centralize them. It was the emails and the attachments that needed to be saved, and they really wanted to leverage the metadata to make sure they could actually find them again. Huge requirement for them was they're getting a ton of FOIA requests, freedom of information requests, where they have a certain time frame that they need to be able to produce this information and send it back in a package, right, depending on the request. And so being able to search SharePoint and then utilize the metadata for filtering and actually finding what they're looking for was huge. And then, of course, making sure it's actually there in a place where it's findable and discoverable. And so that's where Colligo Email Manager was able to save them a ton of time, right? Just getting the emails into SharePoint in the first place and then being able to find them again on the other side. And these are critical documents like HR, legal documents, things like that, that if ever you get into a litigation type situation as well, you're going to need to be able to find what you're looking for and have record of it. And so great success story. Again, we save them 30 to 60 minutes per day per worker. So if you add this up over a year, if there's 252 working days, that's on the top end can be 252 hours per employee per year. So great success story. Maybe I'll pass it to Ed to cover the nuts and bolts from the Gimmal side of the story here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. As you mentioned, we've been working with this municipality for several years now, and in addition to moving emails, we are putting records policy on all of their content in SharePoint Online, and allowing them to basically have defensible disposition on all of their content, from emails all through all their content in SharePoint Online. It's been a very successful implementation and has spread across the enterprise. Tim, KT, are you going to finish this up?
Yeah, thank you both. And thank you, Tim, for the demo. And apologies if some of you were not able to see the demo. We will be sharing out the recording today as well as a copy of the slides. So good news on that. And again, hopefully that has been resolved. We shared some view options instructions in the chat, as well as answered some questions live. So thank you, Greg and Dennis, for kicking us off with some questions. I wanted to, now that we are going into live Q&A, I wanted to read out loud, first with the chat and then within the Q&A function here. Let me see. I saw a question from Linda. Could you clarify, is there retention periods assigned by the Colligo email software, or are retention periods only assigned by the Gimmal software?
I can take that one, KT. The retention policies are applied by Gimmal records, and we will leverage the metadata that was brought over by Colligo.
Got it. And then on the retention train topic here, A. Judd in the Q&A function asked, is an email thread treated as one record with one retention period, or is each email in the thread treated individually and deleted one by one? I feel like it's a Jeopardy type game show dynamic here.
Yeah, so from the Colligo's perspective, the best practice is that every time in a conversation thread there is a business decision made or a new part of that conversation that is a record, then you should save that, right? So M&A, for example, going back and forth, and every time there's a new draft of the M&A purchase agreement, for example, right? You should save that as a copy to SharePoint. Now, what ends up happening is if you have a conversation thread that has multiple exchanges where there's a business decision made or attachments that need to be kept, is there can be multiple files from the same conversation, but Colligo uniquely identifies each one in a thread and can make sure that they're different based on the metadata and other things, so that you ultimately have a separate timestamp or a separate record for each part of that conversation that you're concerned with and should be saving to SharePoint. And so there's ways on the SharePoint side to then go and filter and find all the things that are part of the same thread, but best practice is generally to file the email each time that there's a new business record created in that conversation.
And then thanks, Tim. One additional helpful comment, guys. Within Gimmal Records, you actually have the option when it comes to disposition of the email itself or multiple or the whole thread. You can treat them one by one. You can actually aggregate them together via what we call case functionality. So be aware of that. Gimmal Records side, when it's time to destroy, you can destroy the whole shoot and match all at once or one at a time.
Got it. Thank you both. So another question came in through the Q&A function. Is the definition/type of metadata and dispositions uploaded from the customer? How do you get this into your systems? I assume this is for both of us, Gimmal and Colligo team here. So
Tim, do you want to just expand a little bit about how we create a file plan from a retention schedule?
Yeah, guys, didn't have a time to get you through all the details here. Two quick answers. Number one, if you already have a corporate schedule that's structured, you can actually import that all into the Gimmal Records tool. In the end, there's four components. There's the triggers, there's the retentions, the life cycle, and the record classes. So you can import all that information. The magic, so to speak, which makes it come to life is the configuration of the classification rules. And I know you saw just one quick example there. But once you have your rules configured, they will start automatically identifying, classifying, and pushing content through their life cycle up to the point of disposition. I know that's a really quick answer, but that's the 30,000-foot view of how that works.
Right. Yeah, and from our side, it's wherever you're saving that email or that set of emails to in the SharePoint location, it's just going to inherit that retention policy and lifecycle that you've put in place via Gimmal. So they work very synergistically together.
Right. So on the same topic of compliance, policies, regulatory requirements, there's a question around legal holds. Can legal holds be placed on store emails? I believe this might be a Gimmal specific question.
Yeah, yes. And I know I quickly mentioned it during my short demo there. There's a whole nother pocket of functionality within Gimmal Records surrounding legal holds. In the end, yes, legal holds suspend disposition. You can actually put records on hold in ad hoc fashion, but similar to the classification rules, you can also create legal hold rules, which will then automatically be applied or removed to content based upon the business logic that you want to build. Every record can have no holds, one hold, or multiple holds, depending upon the scenario.
Thank you, Tim. And I guess a follow-up question to that, can multi-step approvals be conducted before dispositioning emails?
Yeah, unlimited, guys. You can have as many steps as you want. Each step can be identified or tied to individuals, or a better practice is actually to tie those to groups. So multiple people within each step, if that's the scenario, can come in and provide the approval. That, by the way, guys, is aided via email notifications, alerting people, hey, it's your turn, log in, provide the approval we're looking for.
Great, thank you. And so moving forward, I see a couple of other emails here. Rot data, and if you have known Gimmal for a while now, we've also unearthed an emerging trend, and we've named it riot data. So redundant, inaccessible, trivial, obsolete, trivial. Wow. But riot data is an extension of rot data, including data that is no longer accessible, so inaccessible data, and or might be incomplete in some way. And so a question for either Colligo or the Gimmal team here, how could an agency, I assume a public sector agency or just enterprise in general, collect emails from previous years? I think this will resonate, especially within the public sector. We've held so many records for decades, as well as M&A enterprises and all of that. So take it away, team.
Certainly, I know Jeff probably could answer this one best. Gimmal Discover will allow you to look back at email for theoretically a definite period of time to go collect those emails. And there's some additional functionality in Gimmal Discover that would allow you to do, you just wanted to say, I want to get rid of everything that is 10 years old. You can just dispose it directly that way as well.
Yeah.
Jeff, want to expand on that?
Yeah, if I can interject a little bit on that, Ed. So as far as if you do have a retention period, but a really major thing here with Colligo is, yes, I want to delete all emails older than 5 years, but I want to keep the ones that are records. This gives you the best of both worlds. You're able to keep those ones that you need to keep into SharePoint via Colligo, but then delete them out of the mailbox. So it allows you to be compliant with your email retention policy, but at the same time, keeping those messages that you need to have past the retention period that was diagnosed for them.
Yeah, and I'll just add that's pretty common. Often when we start working with a client, it's the go forward. What can we do to improve our email management, information governance, records management going forward? But often by the time we start working with them, it's, oh, but we also have this, past couple of years and thousands of emails that have built up that need to be brought over to SharePoint as well. And so huge use case, very strong for using Discover to sift through and organize what might need to be pulled, and then have Colligo ported over to SharePoint there. So
Yeah, and on a side note, that would go for PST files as well, for people who are still allowing PSTs to exist, as well as if you have messages that you've saved as EML or MSG files sitting on a file share or a hard drive. So those things can also be harvested.
Thank you all. I think that struck a chord there. And the next question will probably resonate. I know I'm guilty of this, but what is the best way to separate business emails from personal emails? Though I know this hardly ever happens. Let's
yeah.
not all go all at
Well,
once.
I would, honestly, I try to draw a very dark line. I don't use my business email for personal email. That's how I deal with it, Kim. So I don't have any other suggestion besides that.
But we could certainly leverage some of the Gimmal Discover capability to look for certain keywords and
Sure.
identify stuff as personal emails. We have clients that do that to parse out those emails that are not business and remediate them.
Yeah, and I'd just say this goes back to why we say it's 5 to 10% of your emails that should be treated as records and moved to SharePoint, right? The other 90% or whatever number you believe in, the majority are, what are we doing for lunch? What, maybe sending around an article that is shared around to a team and shouldn't necessarily be filed to SharePoint and tagged and kept, right? So it just probably the personal stuff maybe just falls into that bucket. But if it's truly personal, as Jeff said, the organization generally owns all your email communications, right, at the end of the day. So maybe keep that to a side channel.
And Kim, I see a question in there. If you've copied the emails to SharePoint, leaving a version in Outlook, does disposition apply to both versions? That's where no. So you could have a different disposition for the email that's remaining in Exchange in your mailbox, and then have a different one in SharePoint as well. The one in SharePoint will be treated as a record. The one in the email, most likely, if you have email retention policy enforcement, that's what's going to prune that message out of your mailbox.
Got it. And I guess to that point, there's a question that came in a little out of order with the queue here, but just wanted to stay on track with the same theme. What type of emails do I need to retain for our department?
Well, that's will be case by case, and I guess the big answer is it depends. But what happens, what we do when we do the implementation of Gimmal records, we would go through department by department and do some BA work with individual departments to understand how they work and what is important to each department, and set up the rules within Gimmal records accordingly. Some departments we have departments where certain, depending on the level of the individual in the organization, perhaps all of that email needs to be collected. Other ones, it can vary, but in that implementation phase, that's what we do as we go through and set up each department or division within your company.
Yeah, and legal's probably going to have a hand in that too, to tell you what should be a record, as well the records management folks. So that is going to vary definitely by company, depending on what they view, they being your key players in your organization, as what is a record.
Got
Kim,
it.
I see at least one more question in the Q&A there from Dennis about Capstone official emails. So quick comment there. I'll just broaden the question a little bit. Guys, you may have noticed in the demo, I actually had two folders, one for standard correspondence, one for privileged. The privileged correspondence was actually being uploaded to a different folder within SharePoint. In turn, if you can extrapolate just a little bit, there would have been a different set of classification rules for that folder. And most importantly, to your question, Dennis, there would have been a different life cycle. One of the life cycle actions we did not cover, rather than just declare or dispose and delete, is actually transfer and delete, or simply transfer. So be aware, one of the actions you can take is to silo that important stuff for transfer to NARA or wherever else, whatever the examples happen to be. That action is available to you as well.
Thank you, Tim. Tim Brady, did you have anything else to add on your side?
No, I thought that's a good way to manage it. So nothing else to add.
Great. So I am a little surprised that we haven't had any questions around AI yet, but it looks like I spoke too soon. There is a question, and maybe this is, for all of us here, but what impact is AI having on email records management?
Yeah, so I can lead off on that. I mean, from the Colligo standpoint, we certainly, in our view, a lot of the modern intelligence is a way to just continue to make the filing of emails more seamless for the end user. And so we've actually incorporated it into our solution, whether it's autofile and pulling out the 23 different metadata fields for you, or suggesting where you should save an email based on patterns we recognize in your filing history. Now, of course, all this can be turned off. We have a master switch in the admin portal for those organizations that aren't ready for any intelligence yet. But at the end of the day, it's really about making this as easy for users to do as possible, well in the confines of making sure they're following the rules and doing what they're supposed to be, and properly complying at the end of the day. So that's the delicate balance and the art there. And we're incorporating a lot of intelligence and whatnot into our solution to make that as easy as possible for end users to do, and as make sure the organization's meeting all their goals. So I more macro away from Colligo, we're just seeing more emails. Everyone's receiving more and more emails. There's more noise out there. And so more of a use case for things like Discover, or being able to sort your emails into folders and then port that whole folder over to SharePoint. Is kind of what we're seeing on our side as a trend there.
Yeah, I would agree, Tim. On the front end, we're seeing far more content generated, email and otherwise.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that the time is now to clean previous decades worth of human created data, because we are at an inflection point in our history that now we will also have to worry about AI generated content moving forward. And so making sure that you use software solutions, processes, systems, because Excel will not be enough, nor is it legally defensible.
Yeah, Kim, you make a really good point, and that's perhaps another webinar. Data cleansing, data minimization with AI in mind is a pretty hot topic out there, and we whether that's email or other content. If you're looking at doing anything AI, generative AI with your content, and data minimization and data cleanup is probably a path you want to look at. And that's out of scope, I think, for today, but that's definitely a path it's something that you should be taking a look at.
Yeah, we can plant the seeds, and if anyone is interested in that topic, we can do it survivor style and, vote off or vote on ideas on and off the island. So with that being said, it sounds like the Q&A questions live and also via the feature has slowed down. And so I really appreciate everybody joining us. Apologies again for the tech difficulties with the demo portion of today's webinar. But again, we will be sending out the recording as well as copies of the slide, which will include our YouTube, our Gimmal.com events, Colligo's resources. And actually, speaking of resources and events, both Gimmal and Colligo will be at upcoming conferences and trade shows in the next few weeks, starting with AIM next week. I don't know, Tim, if you can move to the next slide. So if you are all attending AI plus IM, previously known as the AIM Global Summit, we will be on site in Atlanta, Georgia, bright and early on Monday. And so please reach out to Ed. He will be in person, Tim Brady, and we will also be hosting a customer activation dinner. And so if you're interested in learning how our customers are thinking about AI readiness and cleaning up their data, including email management, we are happy to help. We are also on LinkedIn and gimmal.com/events if you'd like to reach out to upcoming webinars. For those who are in Houston, you all know that Gimmal is Houston based. And so we will see you towards the end of April, April 22nd. We will have a speaking session as well as a booth. And then those who came through us learned about us through Nagara. The both of us will also be there on site in Oklahoma City. And for customers of Gimmal Records, we have an upcoming education series, Applying Records Policy to Emails. featuring Tim Brady from Colligo later on next month. I can't believe it's already April. So thank you again, everybody. Please stay in touch. And as mentioned, please look out for the recording as well as all of the resources after today's webinar. Have a great rest of the week.